to our webinar, Critical Thinking in Health, Media Literacy Lessons for Elementary Grades. My name is Kelsey and I will be facilitating this webinar. I want to take a moment to thank you all for taking the time aside in your schedule and joining us this evening. This will be a very interactive webinar, so please make sure that you are comfortable using the chat feature, which we will be referring to at several points throughout the webinar. Also at this time, please make sure you download the files in the upper right corner, adjust your volume accordingly, and if you haven't done so yet, tell us a little bit about yourself. Now at this time, I'm going to refer you to the featured presenter, Cyndy Scheibe, our Executive Director of Project LookSharp, who's going to tell you a little bit about Project LookSharp itself and then dive right into the material to be covered. Cyndy?
Okay. Thanks, Kelsey. And I'd really like to welcome everybody to this, which is our first webinar on media literacy for the elementary grades. So to those of you who are not familiar with Project LookSharp, we're a program of Ithaca College. We've been around almost 20 years, and we provide professional development and also curriculum materials that are available free for educators on our website. And we work with primarily K through 12 teachers and also college educators, also a wide range of community educators. So really a delight to have you here. So I want to start by showing you this graphic. This is what we use to represent the process of media literacy. And tonight we're going to be focusing primarily on the processes of analysis and evaluation and how to teach those to kids in elementary grades to move them to action around issues related to health and gender stereotyping. And as you can see for us, the core of this process is always about engaging in an ongoing interaction between inquiry and reflection. So the goals for this webinar tonight are to demonstrate what we call constructivist media decoding, and I'll explain what that means as we go along, and talk about how to do that with young children using media content that is related to nutrition and to gender stereotyping, both of which are part of our health lessons. And I'd also like to talk a little bit with all of you about the challenges that educators and families face when dealing with these kinds of issues with younger children. Now, many of the activities and media examples that I'm going to show tonight can be used with any age group, including kids in middle school and high school. But when we have a specific recommendation for grade level, I'll note that. And I also want to say that we've been piloting these lessons in elementary grades for the last 4 or 5 years. And in some cases, my students and I have been doing research to evaluate their effectiveness. So I'll tell you about that when it makes sense to do so. So for those of you who are educators in the K through 12 system in the U.S., I just want to note that these activities and lessons that we're going to talk about today align beautifully with the Common Core State Standards in ELA and math, and the new C3 Social Studies standards, as well as the new Next Generation Science standards. So here are just some of the examples of the ways in which these lessons can apply once we expand our notion of what constitutes a text, which is what the Common Core State Standards do. So we're going to dive right in with text, and in this case, beverage package as text. And we're going to consider a key concept in doing media literacy, which is the notion of target audience, who the media makers have in mind when they make a message. So take a look at this package. And based on what you see, who do you think the target audience is? Adults, teens, or children? And we're going to post up a poll for you and ask you to vote. Do you think that this is a product that is for adults, for teens, and for children? So Kelsey, if you can post that poll, that'd be great. And as you look at the package, you can type into the chat and tell us a little bit about what's your evidence or your conclusion about the age of the target audience. So right now, most people are saying kind of split between teens and children. So what's your evidence that it is teens? Or what's your evidence that it's children? Just type into the chat box a few words about what makes you think that. And if we were doing this in the classroom with young kids, we'd ask them to raise their hands. How many think it's teens? What makes you think it's teens? So Tian says children because it's cartoonish, because of the bright colors. Lin Lin says surfing is cool and appealing for teens. So the fact that it's a surfer might be a clue for that. And Barb says the wild-haired blonde teen. And I would actually probably ask students what they think, why they think this is a teen and not a child or an adult. So bright colors, fun activities. It's graphic, so you can tell what it is without even needing to read. That's a terrific point. And notice that some people are calling this surfer maybe a guy. Other people might see it as a girl. Exactly. As Aniyesa, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, but could be either a guy or a girl, and you can actually have a conversation with kids about that. So most people, when they took the poll, said children or teens, but a few people said adults. What would make you think that it is adults? What would be your evidence for that? Because oftentimes products have more than one target audience, and we want to encourage kids to do what we call a close reading of this document. Is there anything that might appeal primarily to adults or, say, to parents? And I see a lot of people typing. No artificial ingredients, absolutely true. Not necessarily going to matter to kids or even to teens. And also the all natural label, which you see the word natural several times. So absolutely true. And you can continue to type in terms of what you see as evidence. But I'm also going to move us on to a different question, which is how much fruit do you think is in Capri Sun? A lot, a little, or none? And again, you can take that poll and tell us a little bit about what's your evidence, just looking at the package, that might make you think there's a lot of fruit, or only a little fruit, or no fruit. And while you're typing in, I love Barb's point that adults might be the purchasers of this, but they might buy something that they think will look appealing to teens or children as well. That's great. Absolutely true. So Lori says it says fruit juice blend. And that's actually a clue that you can teach kids early on, certainly by the age of 6 or 7, to know that when they hear or read juice blend or juice drink, which is what it says as well, that that's not the same thing as saying juice. So that might be evidence to make you suspicious that there isn't a lot of fruit in this, but that it has other ingredients. So saying fruit juice blend plus natural flavors, that's a clue. And with older kids, you can actually investigate that a little bit. So what might make children think that there would be a lot of fruit in this? Because when we ask kids this question, yeah, as Lin Lin says, fresh strawberry and kiwi, which you get as words, and you also get as the beautiful pictures of fruit. So one of the questions we would always ask kids is, how could you find out? And I love that Anthony says, the images say fruits, even though they don't use the word fruit. So the question is, how could you really find out? And even for young children who can't read, we can teach them that somewhere on a food package or a beverage package, it's going to say what ingredients there are, what is actually in this product. And even if you can't read, you can ask a grown-up to read it for you. So on this package, it's a little hard to see, but we've blown it up so that you could see what is actually in this product. And you can see right away that the first ingredient is water, and the second ingredient is high fructose corn syrup. So even for 4 and 5-year-olds, you can explain to them that that's another word for sugar. And for older kids, you can talk about that's particularly a problematic kind of sugar because it's very concentrated. But you can also encourage kids of any age to think about the other ingredients that they hear. So water, high fructose corn syrup, pear, apple, and strawberry juice concentrates. So a key question to ask kids is, first of all, did you hear kiwi juice anywhere in there? But it says that it's strawberry kiwi, and it's got big giant pictures of kiwi. So why didn't it include kiwi? And with kids in middle school or high school, you could actually have a great conversation about ethics around this. Is it okay for them to call this strawberry kiwi if there's no kiwi in it anywhere? And even with younger kids, you can have the conversation about the fact that there's pear and apple juice in this. So why didn't they call it pear apple juice drink? And show pictures of pears and apples. So if anybody wants to weigh in on that, what do you think? Why don't they call it pear apple juice instead of calling it strawberry kiwi juice, which would be juices that either aren't in the product or make up a far smaller percentage of the fruit that's in it? I see lots of people typing here. This is great. So Linlin says, the picture of kiwi suggests something tropical and exotic and foreign, which might go along with surfing, which you certainly can't do where we live. And you could also know lots of other things, that pears and apples might not be that appealing to look at visually. It might sound kind of boring. Pear apple juice doesn't sound as cool as the kiwi, and exactly as Anthony says. So looking at this kind of ingredient and this kind of package as a text draws kids in to do some reading, both of visuals and also of the words that they see. So for us, it's a rich media document that works very well to do both media literacy and also to do critical thinking and close reading. So in one of the documents that we provided for you to download, we have a couple of cautions that we want to note. So one of the documents we provided is how to use these materials. And a couple of cautions are to try not to refer to foods as good foods or bad foods, even if they're foods that you think are not terrifically healthy for kids, as this one might be. One of the reasons not to label them as good or bad is because these might be foods that kids' parents eat or provide for them, and we don't want to pit kids against their parents if we can help it. But it is useful to refer to foods as healthy or less healthy, or to talk about specific things that you can get from foods. So in some of our lessons in the Critical Thinking and Health kit that we are drawing from, we talk about sugar and having conversations with kids about what happens when you eat a lot of sugar. How does that make your body feel? And we also want to warn against or caution against using what I call danger clucks, so that when you show a media example, whether it's from television or from an advertisement or a food package, and if you think it's really harmful or portraying a harmful message for kids, and you say that, or you make a little danger cluck noise like, look how bad this is, then that is going to often shut down the conversation and push kids into either agreeing with you or, if they're teens, perhaps disagreeing with you. We really want to open the conversation up. So asking open-ended questions that allow them to actually say what they see and draw their own conclusions. And this is what we call constructivist media decoding. So that's the process that we just did with the Capri Sun package, and we're going to be doing more of it as we go along. It involves leading this discussion with kids by asking what we call constructivist questions, questions that lend themselves to lots of different responses and different interpretations, and then probing for evidence for kids to be able to back up the conclusions that they are coming to, and not just making it a superficial or gut level response. So in my book that I wrote with Faith Rogo, who is a national expert on early childhood education, one whole chapter is devoted to this topic, and it's called When Are Questions the Answer? And it includes an annotated decoding of a honeycomb commercial for the honeycomb cereal. And that commercial is part of the lessons in the Critical Thinking and Health Kit. So one of the most helpful rubrics that we've provided for you is called Key Questions to Ask When Analyzing Media Messages. And for us, we consider this sort of the ground level of doing media literacy in all of its forms and with any kind of media example or any kind of curriculum area or grade level. So when you use this rubric, these key questions, it's not so much the questions themselves that matter as the categories of questions that you can see in yellow. So asking questions about authorship and purpose and the techniques that they're using, as we just did, or the credibility of the information that's included, and then modifying the wording of those questions to fit the age level that you're dealing with. So we found that it works really well with kids in early elementary school to talk about, commercials and advertising in terms of maybe are they using tricks to make things look better than they really are? And if they are, you don't have to fall for it. You can be a detective and look for clues. And parents tell us all the time that kids will come home after having these lessons and say, ooh, 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 commercials use tricks, but we don't have to fall for it. So if we can empower kids in that way by having them ask their own questions when they get home and are using media in their daily lives, then for us, that's the power of doing this kind of work. So I want to just note that in teaching about nutrition, one of the things teachers often do will start by looking at different food groups and helping kids understand what foods fall into which food groups. That's an important part of the health curriculum, typically in kindergarten and first grade. So the rubrics that we've used or the frameworks that have been used have changed over time. I grew up on the 4 basic food groups because I'm pretty old. Many of you probably remember the original food pyramid that was introduced in the early 90s, and my pyramid, which was introduced about 10 years ago to include activity as well as foods. And the most recent iteration by the government is Choose My Plate, which you can see on the right here. So I'm just interested, for those of you who teach about nutrition with kids, I'm interested in whether you use Choose My Plate. So if you could just complete the poll, yes or no, would just be interested. And whether you do or not, just looking at this as a framework for talking about foods and food groups, just type into the chat box, what do you think the benefits are of using this kind of framework compared to something like the food pyramid? And what might be the challenges in using Choose My Plate? And I'll just give you a minute to type in. So as Barb points out, it's much simpler, and I think that's the major advantage. And because it's a simple graphic and gets across portion sizes as well as food groups, I think that's really great. So Barb says that she uses this with middle school and also in elementary nutrition levels, and that the plate's easier. That's terrific. That's great. And Manconato says that the benefits are that they can see half of their plate. is fruits and vegetables, and I think that's terrific. And as Barb points out, it's color coordinated to match many of the foods that fit into, particularly the fruits and the vegetables, and also the greens. So as Alex says, that the simplicity is both a benefit and a challenge, that it takes away from the complexity that's inherent in food choices. So it might be particularly useful for younger kids. And as Anthony says, that it's about proportion and not so much a hierarchy from top to bottom. That's great. And I love, Linda, your point that what size plate and how high is it piled. So for Lin, the challenge is about the freshness of fruit or veggies, and I think the challenges in terms of what kinds of grains, whether they're whole grains or whether they're processed grains, same issue. For us, when we have been using this, especially around foods that are advertised heavily to kids, one challenge is that many foods involve more than one food group. So where would you put macaroni and cheese, particularly Kraft macaroni and cheese, which has a lot of fat in it, on this diagram? Where would you put French fries, for example? Would that go under vegetables, and potatoes are vegetables? And what would you do with something like chocolate Lucky Charms, which says right on it that it's whole grain? So is that something that you're going to put in the grains? Or for young kids, might they think that something like berry Lucky Charms is something that would fall under fruits, and therefore you should have a lot of it? For us, it's a huge challenge in trying to help use this framework, but also help kids understand nutritional messages and food groups in terms of processed foods. And it's not clear where these foods would fit. So fruit in particular for us is a challenge because Choose My Plate and what we talk with kids about indicates that we should eat a lot of fruit. We're thinking when we say that we're talking about this, whole fruits and healthy fruits. But when kids watch television and when they walk through the grocery store, particularly on the shelves that are at their height, these are the kind of fruits that they see. And even though we as adults might quickly say, but this isn't fruit, this is mostly sugared snacks and sugared beverages, I can tell you right now that the work that we've done with young kids shows that children at the ages of 5 or 6 or even 7 will argue that all of these not only have fruit, but they have a lot of fruit in them. In part because they're often called fruit, Fruit Loops and Fruit Gushers and Juicy Fruit Gum. And they have pictures of fruit on them, and they often look like fruit, so that something like Sunny Delight, even many adults would think that that is the same thing as orange juice, but Sunny D only has about 5% juice. So for us, it's really important to be able to take on these foods, even though they're a little problematic in terms of something like Choose My Plate, but to try to help kids make sense of these and to understand how to analyze both the food package and also to analyze advertising. So again, in the chat, what do you think would be most important for kids to pay attention to on each of these food or beverage packages if they were going to make judgments about how healthy these different beverages were? And in particular, how much fruit do you think is in each of these beverages? How could you tell? I'm just going to give you a minute to weigh in. So Alex says the ingredients list. Where is it? And you actually can't see the ingredients list on any of these, although you can see it a little bit on the side of the Juicy Juice package. There's lots of words that, particularly with older kids, you might be able to talk about that relate to health. And as Cicely says, 100% juice in the center, and Linda says the same thing, that's a key indicator. So for children, even in kindergarten, they can learn to look for the words 100% juice. And if they don't see that, then it's an indication that it's not going to be all fruit and it probably has other things added to it. So taking apart words like, as Shaylin says, all natural, what does that mean? In fact, that's a pretty wide open phrase. It doesn't have much meaning at all. And on the Fanta orange soda can, saying that it has real fruit, important for kids of all ages to explore what that means. Because just because it says it contains real fruit doesn't mean it contains a lot of real fruit. It just means that the fruit it contains is real fruit, I guess, as opposed to fake fruit. And it also doesn't guarantee that the fruit that's in it is orange or lemon in the Fanta. It could be pear juice, because that would count as real fruit. So, and as Cicely says, the 7-Up actually says 100% natural, and it says 100% natural flavors. Sunny D also says things like 100% vitamin C, and you'll see that on a lot of products. But that doesn't mean the same thing as 100% juice. So helping kids to make that distinction and to recognize that 100% juice, and with 5-year-olds you can teach them, it starts with a J, that's what you need to look for. So I love that what Anthony says, that would it be safe to say contains means that it's a very low percentage. And I think that's a fair assumption. But you'd want to steer kids to, let's look at the ingredients list and see what's actually in this before we can draw a conclusion. So being able to ask a grown-up to read the ingredients list for you is really the key. So to help kids make sense of this, we created this handout, and that's one of the things that you can download so that they can understand that on any beverage that might imply there's juice in it, even if there's no juice at all, it actually has to tell you on the product package. And if it has 100% juice, it'll usually say that on the front. If it has less than that, it needs to say it somewhere, but it might be in very, very tiny letters. And kids love to explore the packaging to see if they can find where does it say what percent juice there is. So Anthony, or Alex, the question you're asking about the laws about food packaging, I think that you're exactly right. They encourage a technical truth, although I'm not even sure I would argue that. But they certainly allow lying or deception in the imagery. Absolutely true. And with kids in middle school or high school, that would be a terrific question to take on. So for us, one of the things that we recommend is for any educator to collect food packages, have families send them in, collect them up from your cafeteria or from kids' lunches, ask them to leave their juice boxes or their juice packages or little cereal boxes that they have so that you can use those in the classroom and have kids be able to, in small groups or in pairs or by themselves, take a close read to see what it says in terms of the percentage of juice. And I'll tell you right now, this is one of the favorite lessons that kids have in kindergarten. As is this, we found that helping kids analyze how much sugar is in cereals that they might eat or that they might see in the grocery store or on television, really powerful and very fun for kids. Although we found that this actually works better at the 1st and 2nd grade level. So it's a little bit hard for kindergartners. But by providing a rubric like this that you can download with the materials we're providing today, you can help kids look on the side panel and find the word sugar and then see how many grams of sugar there are. And then teachers ask us to identify what that might mean in terms of how much would count as just a little bit of sugar or how much would count as a lot of sugar. So you may disagree with the categories that we developed and certainly would encourage you to change them if you'd like. But having this kind of direct visual that's concrete for kids and allows them to understand sugar in relative terms from a little to a lot is really useful. So when you are teaching about cereals, and particularly if you're having kids analyze cereal commercials, which are you can do using the lessons in our critical thinking and health kit with lots and lots of examples of cereal commercials, one of the things that's important to have kids notice is what's called the complete breakfast shot. That's actually required on all cereal commercials aimed at children. They have to show the cereal in the context of a complete meal. Unfortunately, that part of the commercial goes by really fast, and most kids don't notice it. But you can pause on the complete breakfast shot and talk about it a little bit. So just typing into the chat box, what do you notice about the food shown here as part of this message that Trix is part of a complete breakfast? And in the commercial itself, it actually says Trix, a fruity part of this complete breakfast. I see lots of people typing. Cicely says, a super carby breakfast. I love that. And none of them complex. Yeah, the fact that they're showing cereal and a muffin and orange juice, all of which have a lot of carbs. And Sean saying, surprising that a muffin would be part of a complete breakfast. You don't know Trix. Trix actually contains 0 fruit. There's not a speck of fruit in Trix, even though this bowl looks like Trix is entirely made of fruit. And as Denise says, that Trix is a small part of a complete breakfast if you were following the portion size. And as other people are noting, is this bowl, is that showing an appropriate portion size for Trix? It's almost as big as the box. It's probably 5 or 6 portions that you're seeing here. And you can have the conversation, especially with older kids, about why would they show such a giant bowl of Trix in this commercial? Because of course that's what they're trying to sell. And you might also point out to kids that the muffin and the milk and the juice by themselves would be a complete breakfast. You don't even need this heavily sugared cereal that has no healthy carbs or whole grains provided. So lots of terrific comments. And I love Barb's comment that the muffin is the grain and the Trix is the fruity part. So we have half of Choose My Plate covered, plus the glass of milk. So let me just summarize by saying that doing this kind of food packaging analysis, whether you're using cereals or beverages or any other kind of product, fruit snacks are great to look at. They're a great way to address Common Core standards and to get at this deep reading, careful reading of both images and of words, and also to practice these key media literacy skills. So in the lessons that you can download from our website that are part of this Critical Thinking and Health Kit, we also have a number of lessons that focus on toy commercials and looking at the tricks that they use to make toys look better than they really are, including analyzing disclaimers, which are another set of loopholes that advertisers can use in their commercials. And they say things like some assembly required or batteries not included. And discussing that with kids is really empowering for them. They love that. So let me also note that we are in the process, based on our assessments of these lessons, of revising these lessons to now fit into 3 different levels instead of identifying them solely for different grades, but instead to identify them as appropriate for certain ages and up. And We've moved, as I mentioned, the cereal commercial lesson to be at level 2 instead of level 1. And we've added a number of new lessons, including one specifically looking at analyzing food packages and looking at restaurant kids meals. So you can look for those lessons this summer. And in addition to that, I want to spend the last part of the webinar talking about the new lessons that we've been creating on gender stereotyping. So we've just designed 2 new lessons. We've piloted them with 3rd graders in this area where they have worked incredibly well, and very positive feedback from both the kids and also the teachers. So I want to talk a little bit about those lessons, and then you'll be able to access those online. Although all of the commercials that you'll be seeing in the webinar today, you can already access on our website, in mostly under general media literacy on our homepage. So the first lesson focuses on gender techniques. And before we start that lesson, we talk with kids about some vocabulary, what we mean by target audience, that it's the audience that the advertiser has in mind as to who would want to use this toy and who would like this toy, whether it's only boys, only girls, or both boys and girls. And then also what we mean by gender and what we mean by the word techniques, which we describe as really ways of doing things. And we ask them to look for gender techniques that they would see in these commercials. That would be evidence that the advertiser has a target audience in mind of only girls, only boys, or both boys and girls. And then we show them a commercial for Hot Wheels Monster Jam and another commercial for Magic Kissing Dragons. And you can probably guess just by looking at these images who the target audience is. And part of that conversation that comes up right away is kids will often say that Hot Wheels, that the target audience might be both boys and girls. And if you ask what makes you think that, they will say because girls like to play with trucks and with cars just like boys do. And that's absolutely true. And you want to reinforce that for kids, but also talk about the fact that is that who the advertiser is saying the target audience is. Because in the Hot Wheels Monster Jam commercial, there are no girls. And there are none of the techniques that we might associate stereotypically with girls. And in Magic Kissing Dragons, there are no boys. So these are some of the gender techniques that the 3rd graders have generated in the conversation after they watch these commercials. We typically show each commercial twice or sometimes 3 times to unpack what these gender techniques are. So they'll notice when you probe that the pacing in the Hot Wheels commercial is a lot faster than the pacing in the Kissing Dragons commercial. And that the boys are shown doing really active things, stomping and playing in the mud. And the girls are mostly reacting and giggling and kissing. And that the boy commercials tend to take place outdoors and the girl commercials tend to take place indoors. And of course, right away, they notice the differences in the color scheme and who the characters are, and in the music and the voiceover. So we actually teach them the word voiceover as part of this lesson, and to listen to whose voice do you hear and what does it sound like as you're watching this. And one of the things that's most powerful in doing this with 3rd graders is that when you ask these open-ended questions and probe for responses, they'll notice things that we didn't notice when we wrote the lesson. And yet they're accurate and evidence of the target audience being for boys or for girls. So that lesson then leads into a second lesson specifically about gender stereotypes. And we start that lesson by framing it around the idea that stereotypes are ways of talking about and ways of viewing people in a narrow and limiting way as part of a group of people and assuming everybody in that group is all the same. And that because it's limiting for people, it's unfair. So we have a whole conversation about that before we start doing the media analysis of the commercials. And We found that it really helps a lot to talk about examples. Librarians is a category that works really well with elementary school kids because they're familiar with librarians and they often have stereotypes about librarians. So when you ask, what might be some things people would think about librarians and assume that all librarians are like, kids will often say things like, all librarians like to read or like books. And you can note that that's probably true. So you can distinguish between things that are probably true of a group of people and people who all belong to that group, and things that are just stereotypes, like all librarians are old, or all librarians are women, or that they don't like to have fun, or they like to say shh a lot and tell kids to keep quiet. Those are all things that third graders have mentioned in the conversation we've had. And you can talk about things that relate to yourself personally as well. So I'm a grandma, and when I was teaching these lessons, it was useful to talk about what are the stereotypes about grandmas. And I'm also a professor, so I could talk about what are the stereotypes that people have about college professors, and then unpack that a little bit. So we're going to do a media decoding, another one, this time of a TV commercial. It's the first commercial we use as part of the gender stereotype lessons. And what we'd like you to do as you watch is to identify what stereotypes do you see in this TV commercial, and what's your evidence that it's a stereotype. So go ahead, Kelsey, and play this commercial.
The study of bugs.
These boys are into real squish bugs. Repulsive beasts that spew barky goo.
These bugs are being preserved.
These are being injected with disgusting blood and guts.
These boys have insects that they mount.
These have bugs they can shoot. Real sticky bugs that crawl like mad, even scare dad. Real bugs. If they're not real, they're fake.
Okay. So Barb's already noticing that the boys with the glasses are nerds. And that always comes up in the conversations with third graders. And that boys like science and violence, and that girls scream and don't like bugs. Exactly. So having that conversation about girls, is that true of all girls, that all girls are scared of bugs? Let's right away get that that's not true. And they get that some girls are probably scared of bugs, but some boys are probably scared of bugs. So it makes for a very rich conversation. You can talk about the two different groups of boys that they show. So as Barb noted, that there was one group of boys with glasses. We actually recommend not using the word nerds, and in fact, not using any labels in that conversation that kids might repeat on the playground, for example. But in fact, to talk about the two different groups, what was one group doing? Kids will often say, well, there was one group of boys who was studying the bugs. And then you could call those the studiers, or the scientists, or the boys who were indoors. And the other group of boys who were shown outside, and they might call those the squishers. So this is terrific, the things that you guys are noticing. The bugs also scare dads, Anthony says. And that's a great thing to unpack in the conversation. What are the stereotypes about dads? Kids might notice that dads are afraid of bugs. Or a number of kids will say dads like to eat because the dad was going to the refrigerator. Or dads are bald since his hair flew off. Certainly the stereotypes about girls, really important to unpack. And as Sean says, it's interesting to see the indoor-outdoor dichotomy. Absolutely true. And to take apart, the messages about the boys who were doing the observation, and that's a gender technique. Not only the fact that it's indoors, but also the slower pace, the quieter music and classical music, the quieter voiceover. All of those are things that are gender techniques typically associated with girls. You can actually have a conversation about that. And as Anissa says, part of the messages are that the cool boys like to stomp on things and to squish them and actually to shoot them. So in all of the third grade classes we've talked about with this, the issue of the shooting has come up. And that shooting is shown as cool. And then you can have a conversation about that with the kids. So yeah, talking about what is shown as cool, what is shown as not cool. Sorry, I have a little frog in my throat right this second, but talking about that and asking kids, is that really true that science isn't cool? And I can tell you right now that third graders will right away say, no, science is really cool. So being able to distinguish between what is shown and what is not makes sense. Okay, so I'm actually going to move us on to one last video. This one we're going to watch for a different purpose. This is from our website, and it's an example of what we call constructivist media decoding and that process. So what you're going to see here is the Magic Kissing Dragons commercial, and then a fifth grade teacher actually leading an analysis of this with some of her students. And as you watch this, please notice and chat about what you notice about the student responses and the teaching process itself. So go ahead.
Magic place to you with magic scented kisses. What magic things they do?
A magic kiss. Cherries.
When magic kissing dragons drink their magic perfume scented potion, then kiss, the magic appears.
Another magic heart.
And when they kiss the wishing well,
it really lights up.
my magic kissing dragon. My magic kissing dragons. New figures and playsets, each sold separately. Wishing well batteries not included.
How many of you think that commercial was for boys? How many of you think that commercial was for girls? Okay, so why was that commercial, Magic Kissing Dragons, for girls? What showed you that it was for girls? Henry.
Pink, bright, and there were only girls.
Okay, girls in the commercial, perfect. Yes.
Well, they were giggling a lot.
Uh-huh.
And I think that they made a lot of things pink and purple.
Uh-huh.
And it's usually people think that girls like pink and purple a lot.
Okay. Eva?
You could kind of hear the music that was like kind of sweetheartish instead of the punk boy music.
And why would that appeal to girls? Why do they think the Magic Kissing Dragons would be for girls? Eva?
It's because like girls are known to like boys and have crushes and stuff, and so like when they listen to the sweetheart music, they would think like lovey-dovey.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. Lou?
Well,
That's why they do it, yeah.
I actually think this is a little bit targeted for young girls because, like they haven't seen, like, a whole bunch of stuff. Like, so they won't, like, they don't know, like, for more older girls, like, they would be all, oh my gosh, like, what is this? But
what from that told you this is for younger girls?
The fact that it was it was like magic perfume and like kissing.
Yeah.
Perfume.
Okay, Shaylin.
Well, I think that the evidence for what he said is that, so one of the girls, when the well lights up, she goes, oh, it really lights up.
Oh, and that's like childish. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
A lot of things light up.
Yeah? Okay, Mitch?
Also, it's about magic kissing dragons.
Right, so just the topic you think is only for girls? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I have a question for you. I know. Sorry. Why? Why would people, companies, make commercials some for just boys and some for just girls? Because we clearly established that, but why? Allie?
Well, maybe because, well, I just forgot.
That's okay. Right.
Well, a lot of boys and girls like different things. Like maybe girls would like magic kissing dragons more than trucks, and it's hard to make something that boys and girls would both like. And it's also hard to show the commercial, like a girl here, a boy here doing something, but like in the magic kissing dragon thing, they can have the girls giggling, and in the boy thing they can have the boys going awesome, and yeah.
Okay, but a lot of you told me, well, okay, go ahead, Eva.
A lot of times when you make a commercial, you think that it would be for just boys or just girls, but you really don't know what some people actually like, because some boys actually could like the magic kissing dragons, and some girls could actually like the Hot Wheels.
Right.
I actually like the old TV shows with My Little Pony. I actually watch those.
Yeah. So why would people do that? Why would the commercial creators not want to sell something to boys? Why are they doing this?
Like if they have two different products, they would make more money. But if they combined them into one and made it cheaper, then it would be the same as one. If they made two, then they would make more money off of both of those items.
Oh, so if there was one toy just called Pony, they're not going to make as much money. But if there are two different kinds, they would. That's awesome.
Or not just the company, but the commercial company. They would say, well, we can make more money if we do two commercials instead of two in one.
Oh, so you're not even saying just the toy company, but now the commercial company too?
Yeah.
Wow. That's called an industry, and that's awesome.
That's great. So, love the things that you guys noticed. A number of different people writing about particularly the teachers coming back to asking for evidence and probing again and again. That's really the key to doing this kind of constructivist media decoding. And also, as a number of people mentioned, that she continues to widen the conversation to join in. So I love your comments. These are great to notice. Even things like, well, if my friend Connor has it, I have to have it. Exactly. So, and as Alex notes, this is a way to encourage this sort of higher level of analytical thinking, as you could see in fact, that last student's comment. And that was just an off-the-cuff remark, so not prepared. So while you're continuing to comment, let me just kind of summarize before we're going to go to kind of a little bit of a Q&A at the end. Some of the take-home points for what we've just been discussing. So making this sort of habits of inquiry, both in terms of the way that the teachers approach the process and instead of telling kids what to see, asking them what they see, and then probing for evidence is really the key to this. And as you can see, it's really important to pick media documents and examples that are age appropriate, and also to pick questions that are going to work well for your goals and also for your audience. So this probing for evidence is really the key. And once you get into the habit of this, it's hard not to do it in almost all of your teaching. So I just want to note that in all of these lessons that we have online and the new ones that we're creating, we always suggest ending the lesson by having a conversation about what can you do. Now that we've talked about this, what can you do about it? And emphasize action steps and homeschool connections. So when we do these kinds of lessons, kids will raise all sorts of ideas that you can think about this when you watch TV or when you're at the store. You can talk with your families about it. Last week when we were doing the gender stereotyping lesson in a third grade class, one boy said, if somebody's picking on a friend of yours because they're not doing the stereotype thing, you can stand up for them. And that's a really powerful thing for a child to conclude at the age of 8 or 9 from these kinds of lessons. So it's exactly what we want to do in terms of school-home connections. So one of the documents that we provided for you to download is a booklet that we made to send home to families about the nutrition and the toy commercial lessons that we have online. And we're creating something very similar for the gender lessons. So once those go up this summer, you'll be able to download a pamphlet to send home to parents and families for ways that they can deepen this when they are at home with their kids. I also want to note that we have a brand new element on our website called Do It Yourself, the DIY guide. So if you want to create your own lessons to deal with nutrition or any other health issue, or to talk about gender stereotyping, you can use the DIY guide as a source of information and suggestions, including in the section on selection of media documents. You can actually go to a particular section that looks at listening for unintended consequences. And that's part of one of our constant mantras, which is to do no harm. And when you're talking about health and gender issues, really want to be careful not to reinforce stereotypes or introduce stereotypes, but instead to challenge stereotypes and give kids ways to talk about them. So I encourage you to take a look at the DIY guide if you're interested. I'm going to just point out, as people are continuing to talk, and would love to take your questions if you have other comments or questions, that at LookSharp we do a lot of different professional development workshops and this webinar series. We also do an intensive week-long summer institute this year, the end of July. So if you're interested, you can find out more about that on our website. And we will be continuing these webinars in the fall and all of next year, the same as we have done this year, including in the fall our first sustainability lessons for elementary and middle school grades. So as I respond to some of your questions and comments, would love to see other questions that you have, and would just like to encourage you to, when you're done, to please click on the link here to take our survey about how well this webinar worked for you. So it only takes a couple of minutes, just a easy Qualtrics survey, and it would help us a lot to know how this went. So let me respond to some of the questions, and then we have about 4 or 5 minutes left. So if you have other questions, would love to know. So Anissa says, great discussion. Yeah, I loved too that that they talked about magic dragons. So Anissa, let me tell you that with third graders, they tend to categorize people into different groups. But the way that we introduce the concept of gender is to say that when we talk about gender, it means being a boy or a girl or male or female or transgender. It just has to do with those kinds of issues. So we raise the word transgender, and I think that any educator who feels comfortable talking about that or wants to have a longer conversation with kids about it, I think that would be a useful place to go. And part of the goal of doing this is really to reinforce the notion that most toys and most activities are things that both boys and girls enjoy, and that there are some boys who would love to play with magic kissing dragons. And in fact, I typically say, are girls the only ones who like kissing? Because, of course, boys also kiss. So the kids all laugh, and then we can have a conversation about it. So I think taking the conversation wherever you feel comfortable and to unpack the gender issues that you'd like to raise, I would encourage you to do that. And Denise, in noting that this is a clip of a teacher actually discussing this, we have that whole section of our website of Constructivist media decoding videos in order to demonstrate how actual teachers do this with actual students. So you can see how it goes. And the teacher who you saw in our lesson plans on gender stereotyping, we recommend teaching kids about target audience and gender techniques. The teacher didn't use those terms, and that's perfectly fine. Whatever is comfortable in order to take the conversation where you want to go. So Anthony asks about how ingredients are listed in products. Yeah, so in the US anyway, ingredients have to be listed in terms of what is the most, in terms of the order of portion. So the reason water comes up first is because that's the thing that the product has the most of. And the same with high fructose corn syrup. That's the second highest ingredient, and then it goes downhill from that. It doesn't tell you how much of a drop there is between high fructose corn syrup and pear juice, for example. I would assume it is pretty high. But with middle and high school kids, you can actually do a lot of research on that. And you can also look at the ingredients list, something beyond the ingredients list, but the side panel, to see how many grams of sugar there is, for example. And that might help you. So we're actually going to stay on. It's now 8 o'clock, so certainly if you need to leave, that's fine. We're actually going to stay on for another 10 minutes or so to take any questions or comments that you have, and to be available to help you out if you need help in downloading anything. But again, would encourage you to do our survey so that we can see how the webinar went for you, and it's terrific having so much participation. So Anthony, asking about a certificate, I'm going to let Sherry or Kelsey respond to that in terms of being able to get a professional development certificate. So Sherry says that she can send it. So all you would need to do is get in touch with Project LookSharp and say you attended this webinar, and we'll send that along. Linlin, I really appreciate you noting that for breakfast and for food discussions, that it's really important to talk about foods in different cultures. When we teach about breakfast and talk about breakfast in this region, we have a large Asian population and also a fairly large Latino population. And many kids will have tortillas for breakfast, certainly rice for breakfast. And so having a conversation and having foods for kids to place onto a plate for breakfast that includes what are typical for foods from different cultures is really key. I agree. So this is great. So happy to take any other questions, and also would be happy if you'd like, since we still have a fairly small group, if you'd like to unmute your microphone. If you want to talk live, that would be fine as well. There you go. And Sherry has given her email address at ithaca.edu, so you can just email her for any questions and any other information that you need. Lou, thanks for noting to talk live, that you can just turn your microphone on by clicking the microphone right at the top. That's great. Let me just say, for those of you who are still on, if you try these out with kids in your class, we're always interested in how things go. So please be in touch. You have my email. I'll type it in again. And you can always reach us at Project LookSharp at ithaca.edu. Or maybe, I'm sorry, it's LookSharp at ithaca.edu. So you're most welcome, for those of you who are saying thank you. Really enjoyed it. And again, I'll give you my email address. Happy to hear from you, particularly if you try these things out. It's great. And Lin, always great to have you on board for one of our webinars. It's been terrific. I know you've attended a number of them. We'll just stay on for a few more minutes. If anybody else has any comments or questions, that's fine. Just a reminder to complete the survey if you haven't already. And also a reminder that the webinar will be posted on our website, so you can always send that information to anybody who you think might be interested in hearing it or taking a look at our materials. And again, you can look for the gender lessons. The Real Bugs lesson is already up on our website under General Media Literacy. All of the other commercials you saw are part of the Critical Thinking and Health Kit. And if there's something that you can't find, that you want to find, just let us know.